Hey, it looks like I'm live then. All right. Yeah. Um, so tomorrow I'll probably be debating somebody. I know that was kind of thought it was gonna happen Wednesday. It's things happen. People are busy. I get it. But message the guy in Discord. We're probably gonna do it tomorrow. Um, so but I just wanted to be on here. I guess a couple of minutes. Talk about some issues I have with monopolies. Well, they're not just issues I have, right? I mean, they're issues that everyone has with monopolies. People tend to acknowledge the problems with monopolies, right? I mean, they have, too much market power. They're less susceptible to price signals. Stagnation issues, of course, right? Most people understand these issues. But then it comes to a monopoly of violence, and people all of a sudden think that we need this. They're making arguments that they'd never make otherwise. Um, And I think that, if anything, monopoly on violence is sort of the worst kind of monopoly there is. I mean, one thing, like, a monopoly on violence by default um, it has a monopoly on anything else that it wants to have a monopoly on, just like by default, right? It has a de facto monopoly on anything else that it wants. Because, well, let's imagine like this. Let's imagine you have um, a monopoly on making pants. Say one company makes all the pants, right? So you have this one company, they make all the pants, right? Now, this one monopoly on pants. What if they want to get into the car market? They want to start making cars, right? They want to monopolize the car market. Well, how do they do that? Right? What would they have to do? Well, they'd have to buy out all the car companies that exist, um, and then they'd have to actually make good cars. Because if they didn't, then they'd have to keep buying out competitors that were making better cars, and they might be able to do it. Certainly, having an already existing monopoly would give them an advantage, but it would take a lot of time and a lot of money in order to be able to pull it off. And you know, making cars and making pants are very different things. So they might not be able to make the best cars, and then other competitors are going to come in and outcompete them, right? So that's something to consider. But then take like a state, a monopoly on violence, right? Um, what if they want to monopolize the car industry and the pants industry, right? What do? Right? They don't have to buy out competitors, right? It takes a lot less money and a lot less time. All they have to do is pass a law saying that no one else can make cars or make pants than anyone else that tries, right? And once they do that, they don't even need to make good cars or good pants. They can make the shittiest cars, the shittiest pants that there are. But anyone that tries to compete with them is just going to get arrested. So they end up, you know, just having that monopoly, right? Now you could argue, it can take some time and some money or whatever to get laws passed and everything, and that's fair enough. But it's going to take less time and less money, most likely, than it would for your average monopoly that doesn't have a monopoly on violence. Um, because they can just, once they pass a law, threaten anybody with violence. And, like I said, on top of that, once they do spend the time and the money to get that law passed so that they're the only ones that they don't have to worry about making good stuff because, you know, they don't actually have to compete. So, I mean, that to me seems like pretty. But people think that we need a monopoly on violence. People have this idea like, oh, we don't have a monopoly on violence, and everybody's just going to get violent, right? It's like, well, why do we think that, right? I mean, like, again, going back to like other monopolies, like, say, if we don't have a monopoly on making pants, one company makes all the pants, then literally everybody's going to make pants. But I mean, you know, no, because like division of labor exists. You know, I don't know how to make pants. I'm much better at telling stories, right? Not gonna make pants. Well, shit, right? I tell stories, so I tell stories. Somebody else makes pants. We specialize, right? And then we work from there, right? I give this guy an entertaining story, he gets entertainment. He likes entertainment, I like pants. This other dude makes pants, I write entertaining stories. Right? And that's just basic division of labor, right? But people say this, everyone's just going to be violent. We don't have one monopoly on violence. Like, with which this argument just wouldn't hold up talking about any other monopoly, right? Like, I mean, everyone's just going to, everyone in the world's going to have to make pants, right? And, if we don't have one company, one monopoly that makes all the pants, right? Like, that's just ridiculous. It doesn't hold up. And then this idea of like, and again, I mean, a lot of anarchists don't necessarily do the best job in addressing this when this comes up, right? When people say like, well, you abolish the police. What do you do if someone, invades your house or whatever, like, and some people just go too far down the, self-defense route, right? Well, you can defend yourself. You have a gun, defend yourself, right? And of course you can, but like, the comeback to that, the what people will say, I've heard people say this to me, is like, I don't necessarily want to have to do that, right? I want to have some third party that I can call and come help me out. But again, going back to the pants monopoly, right? I don't want to make pants. I don't know how to make pants, right? But we don't need one monopoly on making pants. It's not a valid dichotomy to say that either one company is going to make all the pants or literally everyone in the world is going to be making pants. We will have people that specialize, that make pants. And so same thing would go with security or investigations, any of the things the police do, right? You could call a security firm. Why would you need to have one? Why would you need to have that monopolized? It wouldn't need to be monopolized. You could just say, call an independent security contractor, right? Because you don't necessarily want to have to defend yourself in all of these situations. And that's fair enough, right? But just as, you don't necessarily want to have to make your own pants all the time to be able to wear pants, right? So somebody else specializes, they make pants, and you do something else, right? Like me, tell stories, right? I give that dude an entertaining story, he gives me pants, right? We make it work. That's division of labor in a nutshell, right? So wouldn't the same thing apply with violence, it would seem, right? Like, with security, with investigations, social work, any of the things the police do, right? You don't necessarily have to do all of those things yourself because people specialize. If you don't want to, you specialize in something else. And then when you need security, you contract security or an investigator or whatever when you need these things. You don't have to do them all yourselves, right? It's so obvious that it's not a valid dichotomy, right? That it's either monopoly or literally everybody does it, right? There's such a thing as division of labor, right? And people specialize. Not everyone's going to specialize in security. Not everyone's going to specialize in making pants. Some people are going to make pants. Some people are going to be security guards. Some people are going to write stories. Some people are going to make movies, make cars, right? Be investigators, all of these kind of things, right? Be doctors. And then they're all going to work together, right? Through trade and, voluntary and association and exchange. Like, we know this can work. Like, we see it work. But when it comes to violence, everyone's like, oh, we need a monopoly on violence. No, we don't. We absolutely don't. And it's like, everyone is going to get violent. Well, that's just not the case. Everyone may have the same authority to get violent, right? I have just as much right to rule over you as you do to rule over me. That's not necessarily to say none, right? I enact a rule like you cannot steal from me. And then you enact that same rule over me. Of course, I cannot steal from you. Now, we're not allowed to steal from each other. And if either one of us try to break that rule, if I try to steal from you or you try to steal from me, we can fight to enforce it. We have the same authority to do that, right? and we can fight to enforce it ourselves, or we can contract a security firm to do that, right? And as long as this can be justified, ethically speaking, right, you can still have competing courts of ethics, right, to determine who's in the right and who's in the wrong in any given dispute. And this, again, I'm not saying anything here would be perfect and that there would be no problems at all, but I think a lot of the problems that we see with courts and stuff would be better, right? It'd give you more chances for appeal, right? Because you could compete, because there would be competing courts, so you could go to different courts, right? And those courts would have to work it out with each other, right? Like if a referee makes a call that another referee disagrees with, they work it out with each other. You don't necessarily need one on high, right? There wouldn't be one. It wouldn't be like a hierarchy of courts, right? Things stand right now. You want to appeal, you can appeal to the higher court, all the way up to Supreme Court. Maybe, right? You go super far, you're super well connected, go to like the UN or something. But there's a limit to how high you can go. A limit to your appeals. A more limitless appeal process. Well, I think that would be better, right? Some people might say that would create its own problems, and maybe it would, but there's trade-offs in everything, I guess. So this what would be better. I think having more opportunities for appeal would actually be better, to provide more chances for the right decision to be made, whatever that right decision may be. So I think that would actually be preferable. So I see that as better, desirable. And people don't really get this, right? They think we need, people with this special authority to get violent, that have more of a right to get violent than I do. It's like every time there's a police shooting, there's people out there saying it was justified, people out there saying it was unjustified. Every time I just want to come on, I just want to ask, what if I did it? What if it was me? And the fact is that I would be treated very differently, right? Even if it were justified, right? Even in the self-defense situations where it's justified, right? You need to look no further than, say, the Kyle Rittenhouse example, which was so clearly self-defense when you actually look at the case and everything out there. Everyone involved was a fucking idiot, but when you look at it, that's not really relevant, right? Whether or not they were idiots or not, they were all idiots, but like, when you actually look at the case, it was so clearly self-defense. So, but then here's the thing you got to remember is that, Kyle Rittenhouse, he got arrested, he got charged, and he went to trial. He didn't get convicted because it was self-defense, but he got processed. He spent some time in jail, and he got charged. Went to trial and everything. Had he been a cop, none of that would have happened. He would have been suspended with pay pending an investigation. The investigation would have cleared him because it was clearly self-defense, and then he would have been back to work. Right? He wouldn't have been processed. He wouldn't have spent any time in jail. He wouldn't have went to trial at all. And maybe you say, well, it was clearly self-defense, so he shouldn't have, right? But he did because he wasn't a cop. Had he been a cop in that situation, he wouldn't have, right? And that's my point. That's qualitative immunity, right? Or qualified immunity. I don't know why I always say yeah, right. Qualified immunity. So you get this, like, cops have this special authority to get violent in these situations. They're allowed to do that. You do it, you're a vigilante, right? Which we demonize so that we can defend the cops. But, like, we don't need to do that, right? If it's ethical, right? If it's ethically justified, right? If the action is ethically justified, then it shouldn't matter if someone has a badge or not, right? If I kill somebody in self-defense, I kill them in self-defense. Whether or not I'm a cop, that doesn't really seem relevant, right? But if I kill somebody in self-defense, I go to jail. I spend time in jail. I get processed. I go to trial. Maybe I don't get convicted if it's clearly self-defense, like Kyle Rittenhouse didn't get convicted because it was clearly self-defense, but he did, again, get processed, spend time in jail, go to trial, right? But cops, when it's self-defense for cops, they don't get that. Oftentimes, even when it's not, they don't. But put that aside, right? Even when it is clearly self-defense on the cops' part, right? Even when it clearly justified police shooting, they get suspended with pay pending an investigation, right? If it's clearly self-defense, then the investigation clears them. They're back on the job. They do not get processed. They spend no time in jail, and they don't go to trial at all. That seems pretty fucked up to me, right? Again, the Kyle Rittenhouse is a perfect example, right? Like, say everything in that case stays the same except for Kyle Rittenhouse as a cop. There wouldn't have been a trial. He wouldn't have spent any time in jail. He wouldn't have been processed. Again, he would have been suspended with pay pending an investigation. The investigation would have cleared him because it's clearly self-defense, and then he would have been back on the force. Right? Because he wasn't a cop. He got processed, spent time in jail, went to trial. Wasn't convicted, and that's good, but, you know, why are cops treated so special in this situation, right? If it is justified, then it should be justified, right? If it is self-defense, then it shouldn't really matter, right? And that's why I say, I always want to ask in these, what if I did it? Does your argument change, right? And I have a feeling that it kind of would. Right? There's so many things that people don't get, like in liberal democracies, and it's pretty good actually, that in general liberal democracy governments like the United States and European countries and shit like that, we can sue the state, right? I could sue the state. Many people sue the state, right? But the lawsuit is also like decided by the state, right? Because the state has the courts, which, it's good that we can sue the state, right? In heavily authoritarian regimes, this isn't really allowed, right? I doubt anyone in Nazi Germany would be allowed to actually sue the state, right? But so that's a step up, I guess. But we still have a clear bias that anyone would recognize in any other context, right? In any other situation, people would see a clear conflict of interest, right? Say I was to sue a company, right, that I felt like did me wrong, right? So I take a lawsuit to the company, right? And then the CEO of that company was the judge in that lawsuit, right? Everyone would see that as a clear conflict of interest. Now, some people might want to argue, well, some people win their suits against the state. So what? Because just because people win a suit doesn't really mean there's not a conflict of interest, right? Again, if I were to sue a company, right, and the CEO of that company would be the judge in this lawsuit, that would be a clear conflict of interest. No one would say, well, we have to wait and see how the CEO rules to say if it was a conflict of interest. No, we don't. It is theoretically possible that the CEO could rule against his own company, right? In theory, that is, of course, possible, and maybe he would, but that's irrelevant whether he does or not, right? So how many people win lawsuits against the state and don't is irrelevant. There's still a clear conflict of interest because it is representatives of the state that are the judges in that lawsuit, because the state monopolized the courts. And that seems kind of ridiculous. You should have third-party arbitrators in those situations, right? Especially if peer mediation isn't possible, right? And a lot of times in suits it's not right? Maybe you can mediate. But we would see this in any other context, but we don't really seem to see this when it comes to the state. So, comes to monopoly on violence, monopoly on law, say. And ethics matters more than law anyway. Plenty of things are legal, but they are unethical. Plenty of things are illegal, but ethical. Some people, again, like to argue to this that like law is like an attempt to, instituting ethics, and to a certain extent, that's true. It's an attempt at it, but it fails, and we know it fails, right? I mean, a legal system isn't an ethical system, and we know this because if a legal system were an ethical system, then the question of what is legal and what is ethical would be synonymous. They would be the same question. But we all recognize that those are not the same question. What is ethical and what is legal are different questions, right? And if a legal system actually represented an ethical system, they would not be different questions. I don't think they should be different questions, right? What is legal doesn't really matter. What is ethical matters much more, right? How do we determine that? I mean, we've been working on that for a long time, and it's not impossible. People say that, like, ethicists reach no consensus and shit, but this is patently false, right? When you look at, like, ethical philosophers and stuff, of course they have disagreements. There's disagreements everywhere, but, like, and I don't think ethics is a science, but I mean, even if you do, you use this comparison, like, take, punctuated equilibrium, punctuated equilibrium and gradualism debate in biology, right? But biologists all believe in evolution. Forget about the like one or two that are creationists, like that are probably liars anyway. But all of them, they all believe in evolution, right? They're just debating some particular mechanism, right? And so we see a similar thing in ethics when it comes to like the big things or whatever. Like, whether you be a utilitarian, a deontologist. I hate deontologists, by the way, and I'll talk more about that later. But whatever your ethical philosophy is, like, we pretty much all agree, like, murder is wrong, slavery is wrong. I mean, utilitarians like John Stuart Mill and shit like that were, they were staunch, vehement slave abolitionists. When you go back to, and so, I mean, ethical philosophers have been consistently, against these kind of things, based on their ethical philosophies, right? Deontologists, utilitarians, I mean, they agree on the major shit, and so, I mean, they do kind of come to a consensus, right? And so, why could ethicists not do what fucking judges do now and, have these courts to get committees of ethics, which, I mean, we already have, right, to a certain extent, right, in academic institutions and stuff, to run studies, you get like ethical approvals and stuff. They have ethical boards to, approve different studies and approve different things that are being done in these kind of, right, why couldn't we do that for things like warrants and, and permits and disputes, right? Like, we absolutely could. I see no reason that we couldn't do that, but we don't. We have this rigid system of law, right? Rather than an ad hoc system of ethics. We should have an ad hoc system of ethics. It would be much better. It would allow us to consider more things. Because everyone always wants simple questions to answer, simple answers to questions that are really complex. Oftentimes as an anarchist, I get asked, like, somebody does a murder, right? What happens to him? And I don't know. Right? I mean, that's not enough information. I can't tell you what should happen to a fucking murderer because I don't have enough information in that case, right? Not all murder is exactly the same, right? Like, for one thing, I shouldn't be the one making this decision, right? There should be teams of people that are more experienced and studied in the field of ethics than I am, right? Analyzing and investigating this case and the particulars of the murder and, figure out the best way to solve the crime, right? I mean, justice is a complicated thing. It's about righting a wrong, making something acceptable. Sometimes you can't right or wrong. You can't, make things acceptable. People try to simplify it with retributive justice or something like that. And retributive justice in some simple situations can make sense, right? I mean, I steal $20 from you, you make me give it back, maybe $25 for inconvenience, right? Kind of a simple, but that's a relatively simple situation, right? We've kind of we've made that wrong, right? We've corrected for that ethical error. But there are situations where you can't necessarily do that. You can't necessarily correct for the ethical error, right? Um, completely. So you got to do the best that you can, right? Say something like murder, right? I mean, you can't necessarily really make that wrong right. You got to do the best that you can, right? The closest you can get to it, I would imagine, would be some form of rehabilitation, or where we attempt to take a murderer and get them to like dedicate the rest of their lives to trying to do better things. Um, you know, uh, you see in the show Supernatural, minor spoilers, but when they try to cure a demon, they're watching a video of a demon that was cured, kind of. Yeah. Well, anyway, he starts out, laughing about killing people. Like, yeah, I killed the people and their families. Right? By the end of it, he's crying. He's like, oh my God, I killed those people. Why the fuck did I do that? Oh my God. Like, what the fuck? Like, I can't, how did I do that? I can't believe I did that, right? Like, and now, does that right the wrongs? No, of course not. The family's still dead. But, like, seems like we've gotten as close as we could to righting that wrong, Sample maybe used before that I've thought of before, and I'm not really big with computer programming and stuff like that. So just go with me here, right? Say you have an error in some code or whatever, you're coding something, and some error in this program, right? And maybe you can't necessarily, like, without fucking everything up, you can't really just go and delete the error part, right? Maybe you have to write something in after that to correct for it, and maybe it doesn't completely solve the problem, but like you do the best you can, right? That's like a comparison, now I'm not much into computer code, so maybe that's not actually a great analogy. It's probably not the best one I could go with, but it's one that I've thought of, and you could probably make it work in some sense. So yeah, again, this isn't super long. This is just like off the cuff thoughts and everything that I'm having. And felt like kind of expressing, and then I was planning on streaming today, maybe doing that debate, but we can't do it today, so we're probably gonna try it for tomorrow. Yeah, but look, I'm probably gonna stop there. I know it's pretty short, but I mean that's pretty much it. Just kind of wanted to ramble about that a little bit. But yeah, peace out, you guys.